Hello and welcome to the Bath Studio School's Big Education Debate. I'm Anna and this is Sam. This programme comes to you from our school studio. The production crew are all students here studying for a Level 3 BTEC in Creative Media.
Before we hear from all six of the prospective parliamentary candidates for Bath, let's hear what some of our young people here at the Bath Studio School feel about politicians should consider.
I'd like politicians to understand that sometimes the more enticing promise is the one that they can stick to and is more realistic than the fake ones, and also that appealing to young viewers is all well and good, but you don't want to over appeal to them because it makes us feel pressured into choosing the wrong politicians.
They need to understand that we do have an opinion and they shouldn't push us aside. We might be inexperienced, but they need to understand that we do have a view on the world as we live through different changes each day.
I think politicians should be more concerned about the well-being of young people. Young people are opting out of sport nowadays and lack exercise, which is not really good for the future. And I think that the politicians should really put some more effort into the promotion of a healthy lifestyle and diets and sport.
Education feels unfair because not everybody is the same and not everybody has the same level of intelligence, and to compare everybody through the same tests and from the same grading system doesn't always seem like the right thing to do.
I think politicians need to understand that not everyone can afford costs for higher education, so they need to abolish them, as they shouldn't be a privilege, they should be a right, as not everyone can afford it and it shouldn't just be for the rich.
I think politicians need to realise that the younger generation have a bigger voice than they realised, and I think they need to come to us to ask the questions instead of speak for us.
Well, the politicians have come to us this evening. We're very happy to have all six candidates for Bath with us.
With the general election just weeks away, education looks set, as always, to be a key campaigning issue. Debates have been focused on school spending, class sizes and academy schools. How would the parties handle these issues if elected in May? And how would they deal with other key issues, the curriculum changes, assessments, the role of local authorities, teacher workload and higher education funding or youth apprenticeships?
Does the education in England need a rethink? Are we young people just pawns in the wider political game? Here in the key area of Bath, the debate and campaign is fierce, so we are really pleased that the six prospective parliamentary candidates have all agreed to join us here at Bath Studio School for a debate on education issues.
On our panel tonight we have Conservative PPC Ben Howlett. He has said he will be campaigning to protect grammar schools, open more free schools and improve the status of higher and further education.
Dominic Tristram, the Green Party candidate. The Green Party have said they would abolish Ofsted, end of status of academies and free schools, delay starting school until the age of 6 and end standardised testing for pupils, especially for league tables.
Ollie Middleton represents the Labour Party. A couple of weeks ago, Ed Miliband announced that Labour will reduce tuition fees to £6,000 a year from £9,000 a year. They believe the current government has overspent on free schools and tried to run too many schools from London.
Julian Deverill, candidate for the UK Independence Party, supports the principle of free schools that are open to the whole community and uphold British values. UKIP have said existing schools should be allowed to apply to become grammar schools and select according to ability and aptitude.
Lorraine Morgan Brinkhurst is standing as an independent after previously representing the Lib Dems at the local council. She was born and bred in Bath, so many have some interesting things to say about our local education system.
And finally, Steve Bradley. Steve is standing as the Liberal Democrat candidate, hoping to stand into Don Foster's shoes. The Lib Dems say their plan for education stretches from cradle to college, with high-quality early years education, qualified teachers and successful schools in every community.
Let's get to it. We have a number of questions from our audience. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to answer each question. They will be rudely interrupted by a high-tech, pressure-plated interactive sound system.
Bet they won't have that on the BBC. Our first question comes from a pupil, Alfie Banwell.
Should private schools be abolished?
So if we could start with Ben from the Conservative Party.
Absolutely. If I've got 2 minutes, the quick answer is no. The long answer is let's look at how we work in the comprehensive school system to make sure that what is the best in the private school system is implemented in the comprehensive school system as well. And there's some interesting stats that have been thrown around for a long period of time that actually if you go through the private school system and then you go and do a degree, at the end of it you are more likely to come out with a worse grade as a result of you going through the private school system than you are through the comprehensive school system. So for far too long people have sort of said that the private school system is sort of the pinnacle of achievement, that's where everyone is trying to get to. Well, actually I say that's wrong, and we've got some amazing schools in Bath, without wishing to get whoops from the floor, but you know, the Bath Studio School being an example, it's an amazing school, and there are other amazing schools as well. I don't care who is providing the education, it's about actually the quality of that education and how you end up improving that education as well. And standards in Bath schools are excellent, but I've always got a passion and drive and determination to make sure schools are even better. And I would like to see, and the vision for education in this city, being that we can get schools in the top 100 in the UK. Well, I don't think that's an unachievable opportunity and an unachievable achievement, but it's something that places like the Bath Studio School and other schools like Beech and Cliff and Hayesfield are working hard to achieve, and if I do become the MP then I hope I'll be able to help them achieve that goal as well.
Thanks for that, Ben, and we're just going to go to Dominic from the Green Party.
In summary, no, we would not ban private schools. What we would do though is end their charitable status, the privileges they have, so we would make them pay corporation tax and make them pay all the other taxes that any business would pay. But really what we want to do is, instead of banning them, is we want to make state schools good enough that people don't feel they have to send their children to private schools, which is largely the case at the moment, where private schools do very well are in areas, usually in areas where the state schools aren't doing so well. And also there are certain civil service posts and military posts where you get free private school education for your children. We'd end that because we don't think it's not the position of the state to fund private schools. So no state funding, but we're happy for them to exist, and that's our position.
Thank you. Now we're going to go to Ollie Middleton from the Big Point.
I think long term we've got to do all we can to make sure that we're really narrowing that gap. I think that's about raising standards in state schools rather than lowering standards overall. I think it's really important that certainly in cities like Bath, you've got private schools, a very high number of high quality private schools. We've got to make sure they're doing all they can to make sure that they're also supporting local state schools as well. I personally think longer term, I think perhaps we have got to look at the possibility of abolishing charitable status for private schools and redirecting that money saved into the state education system. I think that's really important. At the moment we have a situation where a lot of private schools are essentially run as businesses, we all know that, yet they're taxed less than some charities. I don't think that's fair, and I think longer term it's something we've got to try and address.
Thank you, and we're going to go to Lorraine.
Thank you. Starting off with, no, I wouldn't abolish them. I think it's important that people across the country have choice. But I believe in Bath particularly, over the years, there has been an investment in schools. 45% of Bath and North East Somerset Council's budget goes into schools. We have some exceptional schools here across the city. For those people who want choice to go into private schools, some of our children have managed to get bursaries and they've had the opportunity to then go into a private school if they wish to. But I believe now the choice with academies and free schools, that's important to me. It's important to me about choice and about the quality of those schools, the quality of the teaching. We've heard recently how teachers are feeling that they are overworked, so I do feel that the next Parliament need to look at that. We need to look at what initiatives are being thrown at schools, left, right and centre, because at the end of the day it's important that the teachers have well-being within their school, and then they're able to transfer that across to the students so that the students then continue to do very well throughout their school life.
Thank you very much, and we're going to go to Julian.
I certainly wouldn't abolish the private schools. I think when you look at some of the private schools, certainly locally, when you go and visit them, and I've done some projects with some local private schools, and they are fantastic institutions. I think this idea that we need to try and standardise education is wrong, and I think that private schools and free schools, academies, and providing a much more diverse range of education. When you look at the quality of some of these schools, they're often performing an awful lot better than the sort of standard state model. And I think rather than trying to do that down and try and get rid of it, we should learn from it and try and raise standards across the board. So let's be inspired by these schools as opposed to looking to get rid of them.
Thank you very much. I'm looking at Stephen.
Yeah, I mean, ideally I'd like to get to a stage in this country where people don't feel the need to send their children to private school. They don't even want to send their children to private school. But I absolutely would not prevent or wish to remove anybody's right or option to send their children to a private school if that's important to them. There are some positive elements to having private education in this country. For example, it helps market the UK as an educational institution around the world, and helps bring a lot of wealth and a lot of opportunity into this country, and helps build this country's soft power and importance around the world. But we have to be honest, there are some concerns about the influence that the very small number of people who go to private school do have in running this country, and you need to look no further than politics to see how dominated it is by a small number of people. So I think what we really need to do is to look at improving the state system so that it is just as good, if not better, than the private system, so people don't feel the need and don't feel it's something that they want to do for their children. And within that, two very specific things I would mention. Firstly, we absolutely need a level playing field between the state sector and the private sector in terms of tax breaks, charitable status. In fact, personally, I would look to go even further. I would look to add an extra tax onto private school and redistribute that to help improve the public sector schools. And secondly, I think we can use the power and the facilities of private education to improve state education through buddying up. There's a bit of that happens already. I think we can do a lot more to help pass on some of the knowledge from the private sector to the public sector. But I absolutely want to defend people's option to go to private schooling if they want to, but let's get to a stage where people just don't feel it's something they need to do to help their children.
Yes,
So our next question comes from a teacher here at the Bath Studio School, Mr. Neil.
There's always a lot of talk about education standards, increasing grades and changes to the curriculum, but what will you do to ensure that teachers are valued and supported in this stressful working environment?
Okay, so this time we're going to start with Steve.
Excellent. First thing, happy St Patrick's Day, Mr. Neil. I think you're from near enough the same part of the UK that I am. Good to see you. I haven't even had a second to think about this. So in terms of how we make sure teachers are valued and supported, the Liberal Democrats are very keen on ensuring we invest more in our teachers because we want to make sure they're able to provide the best possible education they can to pupils. So a number of ways in which we seek to do that. We want to end the situation whereby you have unqualified people teaching in schools. We want to have only qualified teachers in schools, and that would also be in academies like this. We would want by September 2016 so that you can only employ qualified teachers. We think you guys deserve to be taught by professionals who've been trained to do what they need to do. Secondly, other things we want to do to make sure the training is better for teachers. We want a Royal College of Teaching, a real strong learning institution. We want teaching schools around the country to help support schools, and there's a lot more we can do, but that gives you flavour for what we look to do as the Liberal Democrats.
Thank you very much, Steve. Go on to Julian.
I think you made an interesting point. The education system has been treated a bit like a political football when it comes to the political arena, and I think teachers often suffer as a result of this. We've got league tables, and we have a situation where schools are being sort of forced into trying to sort of comply with what the government want, so that the government can look good, the government of the day. And for years this has been happening, and it hasn't really worked because the more governments seem to interfere and move the goalposts around, try and change the standards all the time, it hasn't brought our education to a better place. And I think that, going back to what Steve says about qualified teachers, I think it's not as black and white as that. We do potentially have situations with some teachers who could be absolutely excellent. They may have years and years of experience, but they just don't have that particular qualification. I think we should certainly give our young people the opportunity to be educated by those people if they're appropriate. I think we need to stop using education as this political football and start looking at the role that it plays in our society. We have to train our young people so that when they leave education, they are able to be prosperous and functional in society. And at the moment, that's not happening. We have a skills shortage. We have 750,000 of our young people unemployed. And I think that the less politics and the more education we can get, definitely the better.
Thank you, Julian. We go on to Lorraine now.
Thank you very much. I mentioned in the opening question about teachers feeling that there are too many initiatives coming out of council, that they feel so bogged down with that, and I still feel very passionately the next Parliament have to look at that, have to look at not putting so much pressure on the teachers' shoulders. An example is on some of the research that I've done is that they've even been instructed to mark in children's books in different coloured pens. For goodness sake, what an initiative! It's about the marking, it's about the pupil's work, it's about helping that student through any hurdles that they have to, rather than having to worry about what colour pen they use to mark the children's books. It's just a small example of something that is unnecessary. I know that teachers are saying that there's too much bureaucracy, so definitely the next Parliament do need to look at that, and I think that goes across the board in some other sectors in the NHS as well. I know doctors feel very much the same, that there's initiative nearly every week. So let's look at that, and I think then, as I said earlier, it'll take the pressure off teachers' shoulders so they could do what they can't come into school to do, is to teach. At the end of the day, that's their vocation, to be teachers, to teach young people for the future. I've had 6 children, and they've gone through education in Bath, and then eventually 2 went into the City of Bath College, 2 went to university, and 2 went straight into work. So I want to make sure that there are those options, that they continue as the years go on, that young people have the opportunity to take the road that they need to take, but teachers get all the support that they need throughout that process.
Thank you very much. We go on to Ollie now.
I personally think the education reforms that we've seen over the past 4 years have been absolutely disastrous. The Free Schools programme particularly, which I personally think has been nothing more than an ideological vanity project. Well, that's just a change. I don't walk through the door, Julian, and suddenly change my perspective, and that's firmly what I believe. And one of the products of those reforms have been the impacts on teachers. I spent an evening not that long ago with members of the NUT, and they were telling me about some of the effects that the reforms have had on their day-to-day teaching lives. And the pressure on teachers has increased massively. That's largely as a result of a lack of accountability. We've now got a lot of schools that are being run who are completely unaccountable. As a result of that loss of accountability, teachers are finding they're having to take on far more responsibility. Responsibilities that really they did not come into the job to take on. I'm pleased Steve mentioned unqualified teachers. It's interesting though, I mean, under the Liberal Democrats' watch, unqualified teachers have actually increased by 16%. So I'm really pleased that we're committed to putting an end to unqualified teachers as well. But I think we've also got to look at the wider way in which our education system is run as well, and how we value education. I think at the moment we're really forcing teachers and students alike to subscribe to a very narrow vision of education that's essentially just based around simply regurgitating information. All coursework's now been completely removed from the curriculum as well. I think that's led to certainly a disconnect between higher education and a lower school education as well, which is a massive problem. So I think longer term, we've got to make sure that we're giving teachers the opportunity to do what they went into the job to do, which is teach.
Thank you very much, Ollie. We go on to Dominic now.
What we've seen in the last, certainly over the last 5 years, but really to a certain extent over the last 20 years, is a constant denigration of teachers. It is a profession, and people go into it because they believe in it as a profession, and yet constantly we're told, oh, why don't we get bankers in, because they could do it without qualifying, or maybe soldiers, and these people, I'm sure they're perfectly capable, but either you believe that teachers should be qualified and professional, or you don't. So as a party, we think that every single child, if they're taught at school, should be taught by a qualified teacher, whatever type of school that is. Now, of course, what happens what has happened recently is that's actually been degraded, as I say. So what we do is actually start training up anyone who is teaching, who isn't a qualified teacher, would be trained. Because obviously we also believe education should be free. There wouldn't be any tuition fees. And we're also, as well as the attack on teachers, what we've got is a government at the moment that doesn't listen to the profession. We have certain education secretaries in the past who've just ignored what the teaching profession have told them about the right way to do things. And we've ended up with a system where we've got loads of different types of school. We're told there's choice. It just so happens in Bath, there isn't the choice of going to an LEA secondary school. Those don't exist. So where is my choice? So what we would do actually, I think we'll touch this later maybe, is bring all of those schools back under local authority control. And that includes teachers. So all teachers should be employed by the local authority. And that's what we'd be looking to do.
Thank you very much. Finally, if we go on to Ben.
Absolutely. I can absolutely give this categorical announcement that free schools are definitely safe under the Conservatives if we take control of the government again in May's election. But you're quite right, teachers have been facing an awful lot of stress. My mother was a teaching assistant in the 1990s and they faced an awful lot of stress back then as well. And to be frank, we need to be putting ahead the views of teachers, aside from party politicians' views. And I don't think that politicians anywhere in the country know enough about education to turn around and tell you what you should and shouldn't be doing in your own classroom. So my view, and why I back, funnily enough, what New Labour introduced under Tony Blair and we've continued on, is the Academies programme, which is basically to turn around and say that you should be running your own classroom, you should be running your own school, free of the political interference from things like the local education authorities and also from central government. One of the first campaigns I ever ran was against the Conservative Party and helped a community group campaign against the closure of a local special needs school, and that was a bureaucratic decision campaigning in favour of what parents, what teachers, what experts were saying, and that was really to say, look, we should be giving teachers more control over how they end up pursuing their educational goals. You're in it for the right reasons. You want to improve educational standards. That sort of mindset of what do you expect with kids like these should be absolutely abolished, and we should all be working incredibly hard to get rid of that type of rhetoric. And schools like the Free School here is doing an incredibly good job to improve educational standards all the way through. But how do we end up really reducing your day-to-day stress levels? Well, it's to cut out things like needless paperwork, needless bureaucracy, and allowing you to go off and teach, for goodness sakes. That's what you're great at doing. And if it means you come from a background in the field that you then want to apply in a classroom, then for goodness sakes, I'm not going to turn around and stop you from doing that. It's great what you guys are doing. Continue on doing it in the best way possible.
Thank you very much.
Got a few seconds extra there.
As usual.
So the next question was from Kevin Birch in the audience. He is asking, do you agree that all school students should be taught about business so that they don't become adults who, like Ed Miliband, in the words of Karen Brady from The Apprentice, don't understand business? To start with, Julie.
Well, I don't think that we should necessarily teach all children about business. There might be some whose attitudes are not suited towards that, but I think we could certainly do an awful lot more to teach business and entrepreneurial skills in schools, because I think this certainly seems to be lacking. And I think the Studio School, the school we're sat in at the moment, is a really good example of a school that is looking at real industries and real businesses, and in some cases taking the students for a day a week and putting them into real businesses. I think you do get a lot of complaints from the business sector about the lack of experience that some young people have when they leave education, and I think that in terms of business we can definitely do more, but also related to business, money skills. I think one of the things we don't teach people in schools is how to handle money and personal finance, and we have a massive issue with a financial sector that is trying to sell people all sorts of complicated financial products all the time. We have big problems with debt and all sorts of other issues. And then it seems absolutely crazy that the standardised state education system doesn't put that on the curriculum. I think for those who show an aptitude for business, that should be encouraged, because ultimately it's people that do business that drive the real economy. So we definitely need to do more of it in schools, but let's teach them about basic money as well.
Okay, thank you, Julian. Do you want to come on to that?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I think there's a place for students to have the opportunity to learn about business. I agree with Julian about being taught how to spend money, how to use their money when they're at university. My children at their senior school in Bath were bankers. Managers did come in to talk to them to prepare them for university about what bank accounts to open and how to look after their money. Not that I'm sure they took all the notice from some of the requests for funding I had from my children when they were at university, but I do think there's a place for it. I spent 25 years in the health service in Bath, and then 10 years ago I opened my own business, I have an events business in the city, and I've had so many requests from young people who've actually asked if they could come and do work experience for me. So I know the students out there do actually want to learn about business because of the emails that I've received. So I do feel there's a place. Obviously the curriculum is so huge, and going back to our earlier question about the pressures on teachers, obviously we don't want to add to that. But for those students who really would like to know a bit more, I think there is a place for that, whether it's sort of after school or maybe even businesses going in to work with them. I know that some of the schools in Bath have tried that before now, and I think that's an excellent way for businesses to come in and give advice, perhaps open days, that sort of thing. So yes, I think so, because again, there's so much diversity out in the business world now that opportunities and choice are really important, and I believe that that's another opportunity for young people.
Thank you. Go on to Ollie now.
Well, I think the idea of making business studies compulsory, it's not something I would be in favour of. I think by all means it's important to give young people the greatest opportunity possible to study a variety of subjects, business studies included, but I actually think you've got to look at the wider point. I do think it's about real life experience. I'm not someone that believes your education should be limited to the classroom and merely academic achievement. I think it's really important that we're equipping young people with the skills and knowledge in order for them to succeed in life, whatever they're doing. So I think the role of work experience is really important, and it's a shame that work experience has actually been removed from the curriculum now. Previously it was compulsory. So I think it's really important that we are giving young people the opportunity to get out and work in organisations and businesses, but also, as Lorraine was saying, I think it's also important to make sure that we're also making businesses, organisations as accessible as possible, individuals coming into schools. I think that's really important as well.
Thank you, Ollie. If you want to move to Dominic now.
Well, I agree with what the others have said so far about actually core money skills should be covered, personal finances. And what we've seen a lot of the time, certainly with young people, is that they just haven't been taught how to manage money. They've got in all sorts of trouble understanding things like interest rates and credit and all that sort of thing. But that's outside the world of business. That's just for their own lives. And actually, if they are taught that as a personal skill, then actually that will carry over to a certain extent for business world. Now, like Ollie, I don't want to see business studies being compulsory, and also what worries me is this is a growing trend that our education system is used as a training ground for business. In my view, education should be about education. For making yourself a rounded person. It shouldn't be about turning you into a drone who gets the job, who then goes and that's not what it's about. It's not the state's position. It's not the state's job to train you so that you can go into some company and without them training you, you can just start working. The state's job is to make you a rounded person. I'd like to see more sort of slightly esoteric things covered. I'd like to see everyone learn a bit of philosophy so that they can understand how arguments work and how logic works, because that's actually a much more useful skill for most young people, in fact everyone, to understand how to spot a weak argument. That's going to do you quite a lot of good, rather than understanding how how to balance figures and all that sort of thing, which is actually going to be a fairly niche skill.
Dominic, do you want to go on?
Absolutely. I'm just trying to think if I actually took philosophy as a course. In terms of how good we are at arguments, I don't know. There's a chap called Justin Tomlinson, who's the MP for Swindon North, and he set up the all-party parliamentary group on financial education. And it's something that I've been working with him on for quite a while, actually. And I agree with the premise, and it's a cross-party group, and it's really about making sure that we go into schools and teach them about things like financial education, how to set up a bank account. So many young people don't know how to set up a bank account unless their parents have been able to tell them that. And also how to properly manage your finances as well. If we want to end up eradicating debt and also the culture of credit that exists in this society, then starting at an early age, educating young people about that is very, very important. And that used to be taught prior to 1997 in schools, but then the Labour government removed grant-maintained status schools, and then we ended up in a situation where my own school ended up having to cut its business studies course, which I found pretty astronomical, to be honest with you. I love the work that the school here does and other schools do in the rest of Bath, in that they get their students out into businesses across Bath, and they work a day a week out in business. They work in a day a week in the sector that they're looking to get into. And I think that's a really important model to be looking at. So it's not just the classroom-based learn here, this is what you'll end up doing in later life. It's actually having that practical application. And when you speak to businesses around Bath, the Road Talks of this world, the Horsemen's, the creative industry businesses in Bath, the thing that they're really looking for is someone that's got the academic skills, but then also how to get that edge, which is the actual application of those skills as well. And for the school like this to then come up in their commerce studies to pitch a marketing plan to a bank is really an encouraging idea and should be replicated across the rest of schools in Bath.
We're going to stop there then. Thank you.
Thanks. Kevin, I was very entrepreneurially minded at school. I ran my own business during school. I then went off and studied a business degree here at the University of Bath. I then went on and worked in business, and now I run my own business as well. But I appreciate that a lot of my friends had no interest in following those sorts of routes, and not everybody does. So the point I would make, first of all, is different people in different areas will have different needs from what they need from education. So that's why the Liberal Democrats are very supportive of having a slimmed down national curriculum where we focus on the core stuff that's important for everybody, being really good at literacy, numeracy, issues like that. And then what we would do, we'd allow schools and areas to also decide what, in addition, is important to them. I'll give you an example. Here in Bath, the Liberal Democrat-run council is creating a whole new area called Innovation Key, room for 9,000 jobs and 400,000 square foot of office space. And it will make Bath one of the leading locations in the whole of the UK for the digital, creative and technology sector. Now, if we're creating 9,000 jobs in those businesses, and bear in mind a lot of businesses in those areas in Bath at the moment say they can't find the staff, we need to make sure we're training up our young people who are in this school, in this room today, so that you guys can take advantage of the fantastic opportunities, the high-paid opportunities Innovation Key will present. So there's a real argument that in Bath, we should allow schools who want to have the flexibility to be training people up to go into those areas. But another point I'd make, in addition to that, I would echo what was mentioned earlier. I believe in knowledge for knowledge's sake. I believe the pursuit of knowledge is an honourable objective. So I don't think it should be all about chasing numbers. I think it should be about creating rounded individuals who can be make a full contribution to society. And finally, one very quick example for how we could do this. There's a fantastic initiative in Bath called School Without Walls, where basically places outside of the school become your classroom. We could have people from this school or other schools going into business and literally for weeks running their school in a business, so they're there with the managers, they're there with everybody else, taking advantage of learning in that way.
Thank you, Steve.
So, Mr. Neil, obviously you being a business teacher yourself, and here we do have an enterprise, personal finance class. What do you feel about what they've said?
I think enterprise employability and personal finance is key for young people, and I agree with what a lot of you have said. I think it's important that you, as young people, know how to get jobs, how to go through the recruitment process, and how to carry yourselves in the future. And I think what we offer here at the Bath Studio School is that AS course, and it's a mandatory course for all of our Year 12. And like can't remember who said it. Sorry. We were saying earlier about personal finance and the importance of that, and making sure that you're aware of how to set up a bank account and how to save money and how to gain your own personal finance. That's key for you as young people. So I think it's extremely important.
Thank you very much. So we do have another question from the audience. This is from Leslie Medcar, who was actually an ex-maths teacher. They have said, Bath University has closed its education department. What a waste of expertise, or a Gove master plan to make state education worse. So if I start with Ollie.
What was the first part of the question? Sorry, I didn't quite.
Bath University has closed its education department. What a waste of expertise, or a Gove to make a master plan in state education worse.
Well, I mean, I wasn't aware of the closure of the education department, but I mean, in terms of the wider education reforms, which I think the question was getting at, I mean, as I said previously, I think they've been incredibly damaging in terms of a lack of accountability, lack of transparency. I think there's obviously little oversight. I think the single most damaging element of the reforms, though, has been the marketisation of education. I think we've seen an intensification of the targets culture in schools. Obviously, there was the point about the pressure on teachers before. That's certainly intensified pressure on teachers, but most importantly, it's intensified pressures on students, particularly. Students are under massive pressure now. I know because my sister's currently sitting her A-levels, and this pressure is increasing year by year. And for me, I think that actually, as a result, we're removing our focus away from what actually education should be about and onto a purely target-driven culture. And I think for me, long-term, that's what's got to end. So.
Thank you very much. We go on to Lorraine.
Thank you. Well, I think that was really sad news with regard to an education department closing at university, because I think at the end of the day, the education department should be there throughout junior school, senior school, college and into university. And in 2002 I had the wonderful opportunity of officially opening Carpenter House, and I thought it was a great innovative idea from the university to open this building in the city to give the opportunity to graduates and to other people to start up small businesses. And I thought that was a fantastic forthright vision by the university to open this, and they said that they wanted to join Town and Gown by moving down and having a presence in the city. So in a way I feel that with the education department closing, that's a bit of a backward step in my view. I think I think it's vital in every aspect of education that there are education departments there to support the students, support the staff at whatever level they're at, and I think that's vitally important. So that is sad news to hear that. I'd like to know, now I'm going to inquire and find out more about that, because there may be other reasons behind it, but it's a good question to ask with regards to education departments overall as well.
Thank you very much. So if we go to Julian now.
Yeah, like Ollie and Lorraine, I wasn't aware that it had closed either. Who was actually the member of the audience who asked the question? Do you know why it closed? What the reason was given, or?
Yes, because Michael Gove had this strange idea that he could base education policy on either what would work for him or some ideological idea about what would be a good thing for education, and let's train teachers in schools.
Absolutely. It is a situation where central government, for the sake of headlines and sound bites, will force their ideology and their education policies on the country as a whole, often with disastrous results, without sort of consulting the people that are actually working, and without letting the institutions do things, using their own initiative. And I think that this has been happening for decades. It's been happening all my life. Whenever I've been, looked at education on the news or looked at the political arena around this, it doesn't matter whether it's Michael Gove or whether it's the Labour Party. They seem to be continually fiddling and meddling, and always trying to put their stamp on it. We always seem to get an education minister in government who always wants to leave their mark on the education system by bringing about significant reforms, and the education sector barely seems to have coped with the previous load of reforms, and they've been given a new load because the government's changed or the education minister's been booted out and somebody else has been put in. So it goes back to what I was saying earlier. We have to get back to a system that is more focused around education, less around political point scoring. And yeah, I completely agree with you. It's very, very sad that that's happened.
Thank you very much, Julian. So if we go on to Steve now.
Yeah, I mean, I spent 2 years as president of Bath University Students' Union, so you probably expect me to be concerned about changes like that to an institution I know very well. A couple of points I would make. Firstly, institutions do change all the time. It's very helpful for you to give the background to why that happened at Bath University, but institutions change all the time in terms of the offering which they provide, and they'll focus to provide on specific areas, and it sounds like it was more a government-led initiative there. We're very lucky in Bath in that we still have very good teacher training provision at Bath Spa. So I'm confident that the city of Bath won't suffer from that particular outcome, but we're lucky and we're probably unique in that we have 2 universities in the city where if one lost its teaching provision, its education department, another one can hopefully pick up the slack. But to bring this around to what we can do about this moving forwards, the Liberal Democrats are very clear. We want to ensure there is sufficient training, learning and development, advice and support for teachers, not just before they become a teacher. And I want to reiterate again, we believe that you should be a qualified teacher before you're teaching. We believe you can learn on the job very quickly, but you should be a qualified teacher before you're teaching students. But we also want there to be lifelong learning and development made available for teachers. So there's a number of different ways in which we would help train teachers both before they qualify and once they qualify and on the job. I mentioned earlier the idea of a Royal College of Teaching, a really strong, nationally respected institution which will really drive forward the quality of teacher training we provide. We also want to have schools of teaching around the country and more teacher training colleges as well, so that not only are there more opportunities for people to come into the teaching profession, but also that there are support mechanisms for them. My mother, when I was a child, worked in a teacher centre, which exists purely to support the teachers in our city. We've lost a lot of that thing over time. I think we definitely need to bring that back. So we need to make sure that we're providing really good quality, continuous training, development, support and advice for our teachers.
Thank
Can
you
I
very
just
much.
say...
I am going to have to move on to
Yeah,
Ben now,
sorry.
as we are running to time. Thank you.
Thank you. I was unaware of that myself, actually, and I've got a meeting with the Vice-Chancellor in the next couple of weeks, and I'll be bringing that up in the discussion as well. But I can give a firm commitment from my side of things that I am very, very pro teacher training of all sides, and I'm sure I only just recently debated with the head of education at Bath University, and I've been writing letters to the Secretary of State in relation to a paper that she's spearheading at the moment she'd like the government to look at. So I'll bring that up with the head of education at the department as well in the next couple of days to see how we can address this problem. But as we've already said, Bath Spa University does have a very good teacher training centre. My cousin is currently doing her own PGCE, and I've got first-hand knowledge of how she is faring on that programme. There's something called Teach First as well, which I'm a big fond advocate of, and it's a national programme whereby teachers are literally thrown in at the deep end. It's a charity, it's a great charity as well, and they're thrown in at the deep end in some of the most deprived schools anywhere in the UK, and it's really about sort of saying to the teachers, you know, this is what it's actually like in the field in some very difficult places, and it's about giving them a thick skin, I suppose. And actually the teachers that have come out as a result of it, and I know a lot of them, they have been some of the best teachers I've ever met. There are other opportunities for teachers to come from different backgrounds, as we were talking about earlier on. The government's been putting an awful lot of emphasis onto particularly forces, members of the forces, to go into teaching afterwards as well. And we still need to be doing an awful lot more work, to be frank, about getting young men into teaching as well, because this school is a bit different in that there are an awful lot of male teachers here, but across the rest of the country, teaching has become sort of a female profession. And actually I'd like to see it to be a bit more rebalanced so that we end up with more men seeing it as an opportunity for their career in the future as well.
Thank you very much. And finally, Dominic?
I'm afraid I believe I do agree with you. I think there is an ideological view of this government that really has contempt for the teaching profession, as it does for nursing and doctors. It's slashing their pensions, it's removing their rights, it's treating them like dirt, it's ignoring their opinions.
Absolutely.
It's promoting strikes and where there haven't been strikes for a long time. The whole thing is because there's an ideological right-wing slant of public sector bad, private sector good. Public sector equals teaching, public sector equals nurses, public sector, they just will do everything they can to weaken those professions. And it's outrageous, I think. I know two people who have done this on-the-job teacher training. They were really deeply committed to teaching. After about 6 months, they dropped out. Why is that? Because they didn't feel they had enough classroom teaching before they were sent into a school. Quite understandably, they tend to be sent into schools which are very difficult because teachers don't want to work in those schools. So these, fresh from, well, not from university, fresh from nothing, they go into these schools and they just are completely put off the whole idea of teaching. Now, when you've got a government saying, oh, who are the best people to go into teaching? Or maybe people from the police or people from the army. What are they saying? That schools need people who shout at people? And the whole thing is ridiculous. I mean, by all means, I'm not knocking anyone from the forces or anyone from the police, but to say that that makes you a good teacher is ridiculous. It's absolutely no sense behind it. So I 100% agree with you. Gove was an absolutely appalling education secretary. I'm glad he's gone. And it makes me very angry when I know a lot of people who are good teachers who've just left the teaching profession or moved abroad.
I thought you might say that.
So we have some questions from me and Anna. This week, we sixth formers will attend a meeting applying for university, which many of us will. But deciding what to do after school for us could mean great expense and debt. What are your plans for helping us to fund our future and further education? We start with...
So, as I mentioned earlier, we're the only party that's saying that we should just scrap tuition fees. We don't think education should be reserved for the wealthy or people who want to get themselves into tons of debt. We would also reintroduce maintenance grants, because again, you need money to go to university. It's vitally important for not just the students, but for the economy as well, that people don't feel restricted because of finance to what they can do. To say it's unaffordable is nonsense, because you can afford, we're the sixth richest country in the world, we can afford it. Germany's just scrapped all its tuition fees. So don't believe politicians who say it's not affordable. Everyone in government now got free education. Hypocrites. And if you don't go to university, then obviously there should be vocational training available to you. We believe actually that people shouldn't feel they have to go to university. They should feel that they should do whatever their skill set is, whether that's vocational or maybe just going into work at 16. Nobody should feel that they have to be educated. But vitally, you should be able to go back into education at any point in your life.
Thank you very much, Dominic. And if we go to Ollie.
Okay, so with regards to university, I'm really pleased, obviously, we're now committed to reducing fees to £6,000, which really will make a difference to not just future students, but current students as well, which I think is fantastic. The current system is not working for anyone, students, universities, and the taxpayer. £9,000 a year tuition fees were estimated, or are estimated, unless the system changes, to add £230 billion to the deficit by 2030. So it's brilliant that we're now committed to ensuring that system changes for the better. Obviously, university is not necessarily the right route to pursue for everyone. That's why we're committed to ensuring that students at 16 years of age will have an opportunity to pursue a vocational route. We're implementing technical baccalaureates. And then for the first time ever, we're also committed to students having the opportunity to choose to pursue a vocational route further and go into a high-skilled, high-quality apprentice straight from sixth form.
Thank you very much, Ollie.
Well, I believe it should go back down to £3,000 because research has shown that in 2042, £200 billion will be unpaid from student fees. So it was an absolute waste of time to have increased it, put all the worry on the shoulders of the students, the parents. I think now, I talked earlier about my children, they had choices. Two went to college, two went to university, two went into employment. But now, if those two sons of mine were going into university, it would be very difficult for us. They came out, they took full grants in their 4 years, so they both came out owing £16,000 each anyway, and that was the money to help them get through university. So if they now had to make that choice with the cost of £9,000 times however many years they're at university for, it's beyond a lot of people, and I think we're then taking the choice away from students from all different backgrounds. So I would want to see it, the £9,000 scrap, take it back to £3,000 and give everybody the opportunity. And let's make sure then that we won't be suffering, you know, £200 billion deficit in 2042.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, some of the key things about the UKIP education policy involve, you know, diversity and choice. We want to get rid of this aspiration that 50% of people will need to go to university. We think that those that where it's right for people to go, they should go. If it's not right for people to go, then they don't need to. They don't need to feel compelled to. On the subject of tuition fees, you know, we've got a very good policy that we would completely scrap tuition fees on the STEM subjects, the science, technology, education, medicine and maths. Yes, it would be lovely if we could scrap all tuition fees, because they were a retrograde step. You know, if you do go through university, you'll probably come out with more unsecured debt than your parents paid for their first house, which is a ridiculous situation. Economically, it's not realistic for us to promise that. So we'll promise, you know, a realistic alternative to that. And I think it's astonishing, you know, to hear Ollie sort of talk about lowering tuition fees to £6,000. You know, we're weeks away from an election. We've all been here a lot of us in this room have been here so many times before to hearing these sorts of promises. So I'm not surprised at all that the Labour Party is going to reduce the tuition fees that they brought in the first place. Let's see what happens after the election.
Okay, thank you, Julian. Steve?
Yeah, when I arrived at the university in Bath about nearly 25 years ago, 10% of young people went to university. Now it's 50%, 1 in every 2. No government has wanted to increase the government's funding to universities to match up with that. So we had a situation in 1999 when Labour abolished the principle of free education and brought in tuition fees. Now, as a party, we famously had a policy to remove tuition fees. We delivered it in Scotland. We were in the first coalition in Scotland after devolution, where we managed to persuade Labour to get rid of it. That's why nobody in Scotland pays tuition fees. We've shown we would deliver it where we could. 2010, we tried to do the same with the Conservatives. They just were not interested. So then our focus had to shift on how do we make sure that the policy was as fair as possible. The Conservatives wanted no cap on tuition fees. We put a cap in. I wish it had been lower, but it was 9,000. We also ensured it was free at the point of access. And what you've seen now, the system is actually fairer because more people are going to university now than ever before. There are more people from disadvantaged backgrounds and more people from black and minority ethnic backgrounds. Finally, to make sure the system is going in the right direction, we desperately need a review, and that's something that the Liberal Democrats will deliver. And we also need to think about what we do with the 50% who aren't going to university through apprentices and other things.
Thank you, Steve. I'll leave you too.
Absolutely. If people weren't annoyed about the fact that the Liberal Democrats broke their promise as a result of the last election, they certainly will be now, knowing that English people are now absolutely subsidising Scottish students to go to university for free because of Liberal policies. So thank you very much, Steve. This £9,000, £6,000 argument, to be frank, is a misnomer. What we should be doing, and the Conservatives aren't going to be looking at reducing the tuition fees level, it will still be £9,000, is be honest with you and say, actually, I would like to spend a lot more time and attention on improving the quality of the courses and the quality of your outcomes if you do decide to invest your time in going into higher education, aside from some of the other choices that could be available to you. We've scrapped the 50% target, which happened under the previous government, and it should be up to you to decide where you go to further your education, whether or not you want to go into an apprenticeship. You know, 1,700 plus apprentices that have benefited from that policy as a result of this government in Bath and North East Somerset alone. And in addition to that, you know, we want to be improving things like further education courses at Bath City College to ensure your futures are secure and a job is secure at the end.
Okay, so we have our last question. I'm sorry to let you know we have to take this one down to 20 seconds. So we are encouraged to be individuals, but we're tested as though we are the same and we're judged against one another. So what future do you see for assessments? Shall we start with Julian for this one?
Yeah, very quickly. When I was at school, I was the square peg that didn't fit into the round hole. And I firmly believe that we are all individuals and we have to have a wide variety of learning environments that allow people to thrive rather than pushing everyone through the same sausage machine. And fundamentally, that's, you know, the UKIP education policy is in harmony with that. And obviously, from my own background, I'm very passionate about that as well.
Thank you very much. So, Lorraine?
Okay, thank you. Well, again, way back in my day and my children's day, we didn't even have SATs. and now you see the pressure that's put on children and their parents, children as young as sort of 6-7-year-olds, and I do believe that those assessments then do put pressure, and also the assessments for you older students as well. And as Julian says, everybody's different, and everybody should be assessed and marked on their achievements and what they're really good at.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, we're definitely, at the moment, we're just forcing students to subscribe to a very limited, very narrow form of education, form of assessment. I personally like to see oral assessments become an alternative and an option at A-level and GCSE level, and I'd also like to see far more coursework in the curriculum as well.
Oh, I like
you very much.
So did I. It's gone now.
No.
So, Dominic, we move over to you.
Yeah, well, I completely agree. I agree with a lot of what's been said so far. We'd scrap the national curriculum. We'd stop SATs completely. We'd stop league tables. We'd get rid of Ofsted. And what we would have instead of a national curriculum is a set of learning entitlements, which are all about personal development. It's not what some government is dictating to you. It's what is best for the child.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. So, Ben, yeah.
I think that standards should be improving, absolutely, but seeing the impact on individuals in Bath, and I've spoken to them myself, you can't keep forcing young people who aren't going to achieve a grade C to keep going and trying to achieve that grade C, because, to be frank, you're letting them down. The mental health impacts that have on young people, are too detrimental to them. And to be frank, I think it's up to the schools to really decide what they decide to do, whether it's an academy or a local education school.
Thank you. And finally, Steve.
Thank you. Firstly, I do think we need some basic standards for a universal platform around maths and English. I think we have to have some basics. Beyond that, secondly, absolutely, I think we need a curriculum which encourages individuality. Thirdly, I think the way to not do that is to do the conservative approach of going back to O-levels, back to the old days of tests, back to the old days of selection purely on ability at the age of 11. I think we need more continuous assessment and other methods instead.
Thank you very much.
You did vote for that.
So, well, it's just 50 days until the general election, and in these 50 days, we will be sitting exams, completing coursework, and continuing to do what we do, really.
Thank you all for your time and good luck.
Thank you. Thank you.